We've converted a 3,200 acre corn and soybean farm into a 360 acre food farm, and today we're doing grass finished beef, lamb, pastured pork, chickens, layers, chickens for meat and eggs, ducks, honeybees, multiple species, perennial and annual cover crops, and working with heirloom grains.
What we took was the farmland and we're converting it over into grazing pastures, adding all that diversity back into those fields, just so you're talking about animal nutrition, but you're also talking about human health.
And what I've learned and what we've learned is we don't need as many acres as we thought we did to be profitable. Sadly, as we've gotten much smaller, we now see so much demand. We could do this at a very large scale. We'd have to bring in help, interns, whatever, but we see that opportunity for large-scale farming, whether it's one farm or a community of farms. We've got restaurants and grocery stores and new customers wanting our product every day. It started simply for me as a journey of trying to find a way to eliminate erosion. That was all it was. But today it's about trying to reverse the health crisis. Our grandkids' life expectancy is shorter than ours, and we've caused that, and we're not going to allow it to continue, not on our watch anyway.
So nothing that we're doing is anything new. And that's the funny part, is that when Gail would bring different things back onto the farm, his dad would always go, "Oh, we used to grow that," or "We used to do that. We used to have ducks. We used to have all of these things." And then you're so surprised that it's really not. You think you're creating something new, but you're not.
Organically grown food has been
was the staple.
Has been our history.
Yeah.
That's how humans have survived for millennia. It's only the last 75 years that we've introduced chemical agriculture. So once we get complexity back, we can start to eliminate our crutches of chemicals and fertilizer.
And the one thing I found is that weeds and all of those things, that's one of the things that I look at things differently, is because none of those weeds are bad, because I consider them forage. And they're just the first line of defense for Mother Nature. She covers what's bare.
Every weed is there to fix an imbalance. And every so-called weed, its whole goal is to create an environment that's going to eliminate itself. So there's no reason to eliminate the weed, because as long as you've got that chemical or nutrient imbalance in the soil, it's going to continue to want to come back there and thrive until it balances that system, and in which time it'll eliminate itself and something else will take over. And the livestock help speed this process up. But even if we weren't using any livestock at all, and if we just let the ground sit there, the ragweed, if that was the problem this year, within a few years it would still eliminate itself, even without the livestock.
But the one thing we found is that when you spray and when you do these things, or you add the fertilizer, so the fertilizer, first thing it jump starts is your weeds. And then if you add the chemicals, you kill off your biological life also, which does not give the ground or the soil a chance to balance itself. It's a naturally balancing system. We add these extras thinking that we're helping and assisting, but all we're doing is slowing down that process.
As we put diversity back into the crop rotation, and as I started adding cover crops and more diversity, I started noticing that our grain crops, our cash crops were healthier, were living longer, was taking longer to get us to harvest, and so we started questioning if that was the case, if they were healthier, if the grain we were harvesting was healthier. And at the same time, Lynnette's researching healthy food and human health, and all of a sudden a lot of our thoughts and observations started paralleling, and we, from that point we put the link of healthy soil to healthy food together. And so then we started researching and found that the way we get nutrients into food is through microbes in the soil, and today's agriculture doesn't allow for that.
It's just shocking as to what we have done to our food system, one of the most valuable resources that we have, and we've just literally taken everything that's good out of it.
In the mid-1960s, 4% of Americans had chronic disease, and today 46% of our children have it. That's an indicator there's something major wrong with our food system.
I think what the first thing you have to do is you have to take a new view as to what is beautiful. You know, Mother Nature is beautiful. She put everything perfect. Manicured lawns, manicured fields, none of that is what Mother Nature intended. She intended for diversity. So one of the first changes, and it's a hard change, is to change the way you view beauty.
You know, following the principles of soil health, and the two big ones of those for me, diversity and integrity. You know,
Yeah.
we've introduced a lot of diversity back onto the farm, and we've also allowed Mother Nature to introduce a lot more diversity than we ever could. None of this is possible without integrity. And if we don't have an integrity for ourselves, for our farm, then the products we're bringing off of it aren't going to have any integrity.
You have to be able to, you have to believe in the products that you're selling and that you're producing. You know, we have farmers who don't even eat their own products, you know, and you can't do that. You have to believe that what you're producing is good for the people that you're serving.
If you're willing to grow it and feed it to somebody else's kids, but you're not willing to feed it to your own, that's a major integrity problem. And when you have an integrity problem with farmers, you've hit rock bottom. You know, everybody thinks the leaders are in Washington. The leaders aren't in Washington. The leaders are in Kansas and Oklahoma and Iowa and California, farmers. And the integrity problem we have in politics today and in media, it starts here. I mean, it's up to us to get our integrity back and show the country how it's supposed to act again.
Every decision that we make on the farm, we think about the long-term effects. And we try to look at it as the whole thing. You know, not just about our goals, but also, you know, about how it will help the animals' health, but also how it will help the health of the soil.
But for me personally, the biggest change and the hardest change was changing the mindset. You know, the peer pressure that we are under to do status quo, to raise commodity crops, to feed the world, to take bottom dollar for our products. The peer pressure we're under from parents, family members, community leaders, friends, neighbors, agronomists, everybody, bankers, landowners. It is unimaginable to anybody that's not doing it.
And so much of the land is not owned by the farmers. You know, a lot of it is by absentee landowners who really don't know, you know, what you're doing or how you're doing it. So.
Well, there's two, yeah, absentee landowners and or parents or grandparents. And in many cases, you know, those are the two large landowners that you have to convince. Well, the absentee landowners, they're strictly interested in money.
Yep.
And so you've got to convince them of that. And if you aren't knowledgeable enough, you know, as we talked earlier about integrity, you know, if you can't buy it, it's pretty hard to sell it. And you can't buy it until you've done it. So, you know, it makes it really hard for the farmer to convince landowners. And then obviously if landowner or parents or grandparents, then you've got the added pressure of, you know, risking what grandma and grandpa built. I think the first thing, you've got to set some goals. You've got to set some short-term goals for yourself and the farm, financially, environmentally, you know, how much risk can you take. But you've also got to set some long-term goals for what you want the farm to look like in 10, 50, 100, 1,000 years. I think the biggest advice for me would be not just to educate yourself, but you've got to educate your team. And, you know, we speak at meetings all over the country, and by and large, 90+% of the attendees are the farmer. The spouse isn't there, the banker's not there, the landowner's not there. And so, you know, I talked about all this peer pressure earlier that the farmer is under. So if he comes to a great meeting like the Rural Center or Mother Earth News or No Till in the Plains or wherever it's at, and here's this wonderful message, that farmer then has to take that message home and convince all of those people on his team. But I think it's starting with small-scale farmers, urban people that are returning to the farm either to get re in touch with nature, or they're coming back to take over mom and dad's or grandma and grandpa's farm, and there's just not enough acres there to raise a family. You know, it was okay for grandma and grandpa, they could survive, but you know, for a family to try to come back, they've got to find a different way to farm that ground. So that's where we see the big shift at. A lot of the really large-scale farmers are still behind, but there's enough of them starting to do it that peer pressure is starting to make some push there, I think, some positive changes.
As they watched us doing it and realized that it was working, You know, and they made those changes, and it's been amazing what's happened with them.
For me, regenerative agriculture is about regrowing our communities from the ground up. You know, as our farms have gotten bigger, the small towns, the rural communities have just completely diminished or been wiped out. Larger farms mean fewer kids in the schools, fewer customers in the butcher shops and the stores, and you know, one by one they've all gone away, and there's very little hope left now for our small towns unless we change food production.
You know, I think it just goes back to the way that we grew up. And the reason is because, and I know that may be nostalgia, but it was the way food was grown. You know, the neighbor had eggs, they had chickens, and so we would go and get our eggs from the neighbor. You know, we were a community. I think everybody has a responsibility, you know, to take care of their families and to produce the food that they need. I always go back to the Victory Garden, you know, and what was there. You know, they were responsible for producing their own food.
Yeah, I think for me, a healthy farm is one that focuses on life. Most food production today, whether conventional or organic, is focused on death. What do I have to kill to grow this crop? And I think we need to reverse that, and I think a healthy farm is one that is focused on growing things and promoting life, which means you have healthy food, abundant wildlife, insects, healthy animals, clean water, happy farmers. And you know, I think a healthy farm promotes a healthy community. And you know, a healthy community is one just like any ecosystem, where every living being in that ecosystem is dependent and reliant on the others. That's what a healthy community looks like, and that's what we're striving to do, is grow a healthy community.